Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about macros. It's a very important topic for all classes, but I mainly play a warrior as my main, so I have some macros that can help with playing a warrior, but they can also be used for some other classes as well. They can increase your DPS. They can just be quality of life improvements. They can have defensive properties to them. They can be useful for all sorts of things. So without going too around the bush, let's just get right into it. So let's open up the macros window right here and it's going to start off. So one of the more important macros, especially for melee players, is a start attack macro. For example, we have it here in execute, and I'll show a couple more examples. Uh, why these macros are very important is because sometimes you're running towards an enemy and you don't have it right clicked. And if you don't have enough resources, for example, let's just do a quick example here. If I have execute here, let's say on my alt 3 keybind, if I press alt 3 without the macros, you can see I'm clicking the button. My character does not start attacking. But if I press 4, which is my macro, I'm going to start attacking, I'm instantly going to get rage. Which is very, very important because sometimes you can catch yourself not auto-attacking, which is very bad, obviously, for melee, especially a warrior, because you generate your resources as you're attacking. So it's very, very important to have these macros. Now, I have this bound to every single one of my main abilities. So execute, I have it. I have it on rend. When I played arms, I had it on arms too. I have it on my bloodthirst, and I have it on my whirlwind. So it's very, very important, in my opinion, to have these macros set up, especially as a warrior, on every single one of your abilities. Otherwise, you are going to catch yourself not having enough rage. Um, moving on to the next one, this is very specific to warrior, but it can be used for like other stance classes, like druids, perhaps. And that is stance changing depending on the ability. So, as a warrior, if you're not trying to min max as a Fury warrior, for example, you really don't care about this at all. But for example, if you're a Fury warrior and you're running a full single target build, you are going to have improved rend, which is 20% damage on rend, and you will be running the rending glyph. So, why is that important? Because we are going to have times when we're going to want to do a quick rend when we have nothing else to do. But the problem with rend is rend requires battle stance or defensive stance. But obviously, the Fury Warrior is playing in Berserking Stance. So you need a macro to switch to battle stance, apply rend, and a way to get back into Berserking Stance very fast. Why is it important to do it very fast? Is because when you're applying rend, you want to make sure you do it between swing timers. You do not want to do a swing while you're in battle stance, that because you're going to gain rage, and then as soon as you switch back to berserking stance, you're going to lose all that rage. So, and rage is everything you need to do damage. So essentially, it's very important to do it fast. The way I do it, I have two rend macros. The first rend macro is this one right here, and I have this macro in my berserking stance bar. So this is my Berserking Stance bar, and this rend macro right here. I clicked it by mistake. So this one right here, it's right here. So what this macro does is obviously the tooltip, and if I don't have stance 1, so it's stance 1 is battle stance, stance 2 is defensive stance, stance 3 is berserking stance, berserker stance, I'm sorry. So if I don't have stance 1, which is battle stance, cast battle stance, and then cast rend. So if I click number 5 right here, I just messed up the macro here. Right? So right here, I click number 5, it switched me to battle stance. Now when I'm in battle stance, right now because I changed the macro, it messed up. I have the other rend button on my same keybind. It's very important, in my opinion, it's important to have it on the same keybind because You spam number 5 in Berserking Stance to switch to Battle Stance. And once you're in Battle Stance, the other macro that actually applies rend is here. Technically, you could do this on the same one. You could have the same macro here. I don't know. When I set it up, I just had 2 of them. You can do it with this one macro. You can keep it on both stances. I'll show you right here. I'll keep the same macro here, and it's going to work just fine. And I'm also going to add start attack to it. Okay. Yeah, I'm changing it up a bit as we do this video. Once I'm here, I'm going to spam 5. See, it's the same macro. I have rend up. So now, as we just talked about that, it's going to lead up into the different part that I just talked about. So, because we are going to be changing stances to apply rend, and if we want to, for example, go into like a charge or something, you will want to change stances, because obviously charge, it has also the same thing. No stance, 1, battle stance, charge, because you can't charge in Berserker Stance. Now you're going to be in battle stance, and what are you going to do? How are you going to get it out of battle stance? You could keybind Berserker, which is fine, but in my opinion, it's not as efficient. The best way to do it is to have another set of your main abilities on macros. The same way we had the set for auto attack, which is, start attack, you also want to have another set with the same thing. Cast no stance 3, which means if we don't have Berserker Stance, cast Berserker Stance and go into Bloodthirst. And I have this also for Whirlwind. I believe I have it. I don't have it for Slam, because Slam can be cast in all stances. So if I'm in battle stance, I don't even macro in Slam, because you can use it in all stances. So Slam is just, it's there. And I don't have start attack on Slam, because you always cast something else before Slam. Like if you're running to a target, your main priority is Bloodthirst. So you're never going to be casting Slam first, ever. So how it's going to work right here is, let's say we go in, where we start attacking, right? We're attacking the enemy, right? Now we want to rend. Once we rend, I just hit number 1. I'm back in Berserker Stance. So essentially, it's 1 through 5 is when I'm in Berserker Stance. It's the start attack macro for abilities, where I'm in a different stance. I have those same main abilities macro keybound to the same buttons, but with the change stance macro. So if I go to battle stance here, see I have 1, 2, 3, Bloodthirst, Whirlwind, Slam. They're all macros, and execute. They're all macros to get me into my correct stance. And same if I'm in defensive stance, which I'm going to go over in a bit. Same thing, 1, 2. Bloodthirst, Whirlwind. If I press 1 right now, I'm in Berserker Stance. If I press 1 here, I'm in Berserker Stance. So that's the main point of this. This makes it very, very easy to stance. It makes it very, very, very efficient. And that way, like for example, if I'm right here, right, I have this swing timer here. Here it is. So let's say, oh, I just swung, rend, I'm back in Berserker Stance before this swing finished. That allows me to only generate rage with my swings while I am in Berserker Stance. This makes it so that you do not waste any rage. Now, one more very important thing. The next one is the Desync macro. Now, this only really applies to Fury Warriors, because if you, let's start attacking here. So I have the swing timer, weak aura right here. If I cast Heroic Throw, well, first off, before I talk about that, if you have the same speed weapons, they're both 3.6, they should cast at the same time. Sometimes when you start to fight, they're gonna naturally desync themselves, but sometimes, like when you cast Heroic Throw, if you take a look at the swing timer now, Heroic Throw syncs your attacks, which is bad. Why is it bad? Because currently the way the game is built, Deep Wound munches. What it means that if you crit with 2 things at the same exact time, instead of both of them applying a stack and an increase of the Deep Wound, they're not gonna work. They're not gonna stack. So if you have 2 auto attacks hitting at the same time and both of them critting, that is going to cause only 1 stack of D-Poon to apply, which is a DPS loss. This can also occur if you do, like, for example, Bloodthirst and a melee hit at the same time, but it's very hard for that to happen because you have to exactly line up Bloodthirst with your melee hit, which sometimes doesn't happen. Sometimes it does, but it's something you can't really account for because you want to increase your GCDs, but at least for the swing timers, you can control it, so we want to control it. The way we control it is with the Desync macro. It's a very simple macro: clear target, target last target, start attack. So if while I'm attacking here, I have this macro bound to G. If I just spam it right here, you can look at the swing timer. What happened as I spammed it? It moved, and I just spam it until it moves where I want it to move, and then, as you can see right now, my swing timers are separated. This is important for 2 things. It's important for D-Poons, like I talked about, but it's also very important for our offhand. Now, as you know, offhands have a different hit chance requirement. With your main hand and special abilities, you need to be at 8%. As a Fury Warrior, you're at 5 because you have 3 from talents. You need to be at, I don't know, I think it's 11, 15 or something. I don't remember the exact number, but you need a much higher hit percentage to never miss with your offhand. But there's a very cool mechanic. Whenever you have a heroic strike or a cleave queued up, and that only procs off of your main hand. But while you have that queued up, and while it's still queued, just give you a quick example here. So I'm going to desync this right here. So if I queue up heroic strike, while it's queued up, if I hit with my offhand, it's never going to miss. So my offhand is never going to miss as long as I keep spamming heroic strike, which shouldn't happen, but it does. That's how the ability works. That's why you always, no matter what, want to have heroic strike or cleave queued up. Not just because it's a damage increase, but also because you never miss with your offhand. So that's a very important thing, because the concept of a Fury Warrior is your main hand strikes should never be generating rage, because they should always be used on heroic strikes. And your offhand swings should never miss because you always have heroic strike queued up, and the offhand swings are going to be generating rage for your main abilities such as Bloodthirst, Whirlwind, Slam. That's the main concept of a Fury Warrior. That's why it's very important to have haste buffs and stuff like that. But not to get into that, it's a macro video. Sorry if I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm just trying to do this one take here. So we talked about Startattack Macros, Stance Change Macros, Desync Macros. We kind of went over that, why it's important. Now, defensive macros. In my opinion, they're very, very important for a Fury Warrior, especially on some fights like XT. If you get targeted by a gravity bomb during Tantrum, you're dead. Why you're dead? Because Fury Warrior is the only class that has damage taken increased baked into the spec. As you can see, while you're in Berserker Stance, all damage taken is increased by 5%. Plus, if you have, for example, Death Swish, your DPS cooldown available during that Tantrum, you're taking another 5% increased damage. And if you have Recklessness up, well, that's another 20%. That's 30% increased damage taken. You're gonna die. If you don't have a shield from a priest or something, you're gonna die. But we have shield wall, but you can't use shield wall while you're dual wielding because it requires defensive stance and shields. So there's a very cool macro that we can do right here is for shield wall. We have the first thing we just talked about earlier. It's very easy. It's the no stance, switch the stances. We want to equip our main hand weapon, whatever that is. In my case, it's Aesir's Edge. And we want to equip the shield, whatever that shield might be in our case. In my case, it is the Bulwark of Algalon. And then we want to cast Shield Wall. We do need one more macro to accompany this, because once we're in Shield Wall, we're going to be having a two-hander and shield. But we want to switch as soon as possible to two-handers so we can continue doing damage. Now we're going to use this macro, which is going to equip our Fury set. In my case, it's my gear. I feel like this is just the easiest way to do it. We equip our Fury set, which is essentially our BIS, but because we are in combat, the only thing it's gonna allow us to change is our weapons. So it doesn't matter, it can be literally an empty set of all your items, it can just have your weapons equipped. It's still gonna work, because the only items you can change in combat are weapons. So once we hit that, it's gonna equip our set, and then it's gonna automatically take us out of defensive stance into Berserker Stance. So how it looks like right here is, I'm gonna get some rage here. Some rage. Okay. So Shift V is my shield wall macro. So I'm gonna open up this. So if I click this, it's gonna switch my shield. It popped shield wall, switched me to defensive stance. Now once the whatever damaging debuff finishes, I have number 3 right here. If I press number 3, it's gonna equip my sword, get me back into Berserker Stance so I can continue doing damage. I didn't do this, but you could. You could make another set of offensive abilities, such as Bloodthirst and Whirlwind. Let's make one right now, actually. So we're gonna take our this macro right here. We're gonna copy it, and we're gonna make a Bloodthirst equipment, let's say. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna do a show tooltip Bloodthirst. Okay. Did I misspell it? Blood. Yeah. Can't spell. There it is. So Bloodthirst. And then we're gonna do cast Bloodthirst. So what we did here is why I just gave this example, is instead of having number 3 here as just equip our gear and switch stances, we could also go a step further. We could have it actually be tied to our ability, so we don't have to have this extra one. So let's say if we go back to Berserker Stance, so we do the same thing with the shield, we equip the shield, but now instead of having to have that separate button, we can just have a Bloodthirst. As you can see, it switches us to Berserker Stance, starts casting our number 1, which is Bloodthirst, and switches our weapons. So there's a lot of those cool things, and all of these concepts I'm showing you are very basic building blocks that you can use to build whatever macros you want. And then the last thing that I would want to talk about is our focus macro and focus Sunder Armor macro. It's a very simple focus at mouse over, so that way you can set focus on whatever you're mousing over. Then the next one is intervene. I use this for mobility purposes. So for example, if I need to move closer to this guy, I'm gonna do Alt-1. Sorry. Oh, not Alt-1, I apologize. Alt-2, I'm gonna set this Shadow Priest as a focus right here, as you can see. And then I have this, which is change my stance to defensive stance and target my focus intervene. So I have nothing targeted right now. As you can see, I've had the target enemy targeted. I'm gonna get some rage, shift 1. It would intervene to that guy, but it's not because he's not in my party. But the point is, it would intervene my focus. That's good for mobility. Another good thing, for example, General Vezex, if you're keeping up Sunders, and even Yogg, you want to keep up Sunders and Yogg, but you might want to be DPSing the ads. So let's say I'm going to get my Sunders up here. I'm going to set this guy to focus. I'm going to get my Sunders up. For a second. Okay. So let's say this guy has 4 stacks of Sunder, and this guy has getting Sunders up here. And now I have my Shift Q macro, which is do Sunder. Look at this right here. See? So it applies Sunder to a target without even targeting it. This is good for 2 things. One, you can obviously stack Sunders without having to switch targets, which is very good. But also a very cool thing is, for example, you always kill Vezex much faster. So you never you wanna stop at 5% and then you chill for like a minute till the fucking Serenite spawns. But while you're doing that, you really don't want to proc your trinkets by mistake, because you want to have those procs when you bloodlust during Serenite. But at the same time, you don't want to drop Sunder stacks on Vezex, because once you switch back on him, you want to have that debuff So you can do as much damage, even though it's very little, but still it's min-maxing. If you don't have Vezex targeted, let's say if I don't have this guy targeted right here, and I do Sunders, look at this. I'm not attacking him, okay? I'm not attacking, and it is applying Sunders. Obviously, it might still proc the trinket. There's a possibility, but it's a much smaller chance of a play. As you can see, I applied 3 stacks and then it proc one of my trinkets. If I was auto attacking, everything would have proc because there's more chances to proc because you're swinging and applying Sunders. Because you're only going to be doing it once every 30 seconds to refresh it. It's a very small chance you're going to proc your trinkets, but you're going to still keep your Sunders up. So it's a very cool thing to do. I think that's it. Like, those are all the very important macros. One more very important macro to kind of keep track of is like your DPS cooldowns. So like your Death Wish, you proc your Rachel, use 10. What is 10? It is your hyperspeed accelerators. You also have a separate macro for that. You use 10 because 10 is your weapon slot. So if you change your gloves, it's always going to automatically update. So you have that available. As well as for rocket boots, you have that as 8. And then for my cloak, I think I was just lazy and I dragged and dropped the cloak without the macro. But you could also macro that in and have it use the appropriate slot for this. I can't remember which one it is right now, but you can also do that for the falling speed. And yeah, those are all the very important macros. I will go make a more in-depth guide with the how you want to kind of use this to min-max your DPS and get some good parses, but those are all the tools you need to have at your disposal if you want to kind of optimize everything. Might have not gone over all the abilities, but the same foundation. Like, for example, one more bonus thing is Shattering Throw. It's the same thing. If you have to use it in a certain stance, you just put that row before it and then you cast the ability. Pretty simple. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody sticking through and watching. I hope you've learned something new. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and like, and I'll see you in the next one.